think I'll get it started. Can you guys hear me, Aaron? Everything good there?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Awesome. All right. Well, my name's Steven Zettel. I'm a guide here in Idaho, and I was elected to the board of directors for IOGA back in December. So this has kind of been one of my roles, is setting up these virtual campfires for guides and kind of getting the word out about some of the stuff that's going on. So with that being said, if you did not view the first virtual campfire, there's a link in the graphic that we've been sending out to get everybody on this call. And there's also other ways, if you can contact IOGA or one of us, you can get that link and view that first video. So if you're kind of out of the know on this matter, that can help you out and kind of get you caught up to date. So back in December, when I got on the thing, that was kind of when IOGA first started getting serious about, or started really looking into this executive order issue. And we created the overtime committee. And the overtime committee's mission is to halt or alter, mitigate, or replace this executive order so that it fits our industry. And I would really like to emphasize that that is one of the key issues for, I think, us in Idaho and around, is not the minimum wage factor or anything like that. It's that this simply does not fit our industry. It's going to most likely take away a lot of the freedoms that guides so enjoy working in the outdoor industry. And so that's why we didn't call it the minimum wage committee. We called it the overtime committee, because it's the other aspects of this deal that we have issues with. So as far as the agenda goes, we're going to start off with Aaron and Leah are going to kind of do a similar thing as last time with a lecture slides, kind of stuff like that. And then Michael Hughes is from Northwest Rafting is going to do a little spiel for us. And then after that, we'll have questions and answers. Keep that in mind with the Q&A. No personal examples or attacks, things like that. What we're going to do is have everybody send those messages or send questions to Jess Zettel. She'll probably comment in there to send those questions directly to her, and then they'll relay that to me, and then I'll be able to ask the panel. Same as last time, some answers may be unknown. We may not know what that will be. That's unfortunate, but we're working through it. We're learning everything that we can every day. The entire panel, we're all guides. We're all in this industry. Most of the outfitters we work for, we're guides. So we're trying to show that this is, a big community effort. And that's that's what this is all about, showing, the guides that we're reaching out to them and trying to inform them. So with that being said, I think we are probably ready to push this over to Aaron and Leah to start off their thing. So yeah, let's go that way.
And sorry, Leah, to interrupt. Just before you start, we want to do some just quick round introductions, yourself, Michael, and then have you jump in.
Sure.
All right. Well, and sorry, and again, I'll interrupt my interruption just to say thank you, Steven, for everybody who jumped on. IOG is really, really lucky to have. I know it just sounds like a thing that people say, but we're really lucky to have Steven in the role. He's hit the ground running and really put a lot of work in and a lot of heart into being guide VP, which I really personally appreciate, not least putting these things together. So if you get a chance to buy Steven a beer or do something nice for him, I'd strongly encourage it. And with that hopeful final intermittent interruption, Leah, why don't you kick it off with your introduction?
Hi, everyone. My name's Leah Corrigan. I did the last campfires, so I think I recognize most of the names on here. For those of you that don't know me, I am a lawyer. I work in the recreation law field, which means my clients are outfitters. We deal with all sorts of legal compliance issues, now including this fantastic employment law issue that we're going to be talking about today. Stephen mentioned that I'm a guide. I don't guide as much anymore as I used to, but I spent about 10 years in that role as a multi-day guide, and then a few more years doing day trips. So I have a pretty good sense of what you all are up to, and hopefully have a well-rounded perspective on this issue, since I can see a lot of this stuff from the outfitter angle, the guide angle, and also the legal angle. And so we're going to try to get you a whole bunch of deeper information today than we did last time. So that's my intro. Aaron?
Aaron Lieberman, Executive Director of the Idaho Outfitters and Guides Association, IOGA. I'm also a guide. Have been for a long time here in Idaho. So even though representing the association, I have a personal stake and hopefully some perspective on it from fellow guides. Michael.
Hey, I'm Michael Hughes from Northwest Raft Company. I'm also a guide and I do operations management for the company. And I jumped in on this team because I really wanted to help inform guides on this pretty big event in the guiding world. And so far, it's been pretty cool to see lots of people asking me questions and seeing these campfires pretty well attended, and guides getting informed because it's pretty big. And I think I have a good perspective on some things, and just really was hoping to help out.
Oh, really appreciate you being here, Michael. With that, Stephen, what do you think? Should we pass it? I think Leah's kicking off on the agenda. Should we pass it on to Leah?
Yeah, I think if Leah's ready, we should start off there. That'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
So Stephen went over a couple of ground rules. I put them up on the screen here so everyone can see them, but really, I mean, this is all kind of obvious stuff. We're here for educational purposes. So my purpose here is to explain what's happening. There have been some big changes even since the last campfire. I can't answer any specific questions. It's not ethically appropriate for me to do that. So we'll try to answer as many of your general questions as we can, but please don't put specific questions about your specific scenario in the chat, because we're not going to be able to answer that. Also, IOGA is a great community, Idaho Guides. I'm not super worried about anyone being rude or disrespectful, but let's keep everything constructive. I don't really see that there are anybody's on opposite sides of this issue, so hopefully nobody else does either. But if you do, try to keep everything constructive. Lastly, this is nothing, at least speaking for me and for these other guys, because they're not lawyers. Nothing we're doing here today is giving you legal advice. That's a disclaimer I have to make, but also as a practical matter, I don't want anybody walking out of here thinking they know anything about their specific situation based on this session. You need to do your own research and your own due diligence, but we can give you some guidance for how to think about this stuff. So there's a ton of information on these slides, and I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to talk through what we went over last time, because I think that baseline knowledge will help you understand where we are at now. There was an executive order signed by President Biden that reinstated an executive order that was signed by President Obama with some additional rules. And the upshot of all of that was, when President Biden came into office, he created a minimum wage increase and an overtime, formalized some overtime rules that had already existed in the law. The upshot of that, that's really the most important to understand, is some of those rules, other than the minimum wage increase, were already in place under the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's been the case for many, many years. But, you know, we've all been able to hang out in Idaho in the Frank Church, which is its own little world where a lot of the normal rules that apply to the rest of society didn't seem to reach us. And President Biden's order specifically identified outfitters and guided services on federal lands as being the target of some of these enforcement actions. So it created a situation where all of a sudden the spotlight on some of this stuff is really on outfitters and guides in a way that it never, ever has been. And that's what Michael alluded to. It's really kind of a game-changing event for guides and outfitters globally. So if you want to know more about the details of those executive orders, you can go back and watch that Campfire #1. I'm not going to go over it here. And also, importantly, things have changed even since our last Campfire talk on February 7th. So I'm going to talk about some court cases that completely changed the landscape, but the upshot is, this is important for you to understand, the executive orders that we spent so much time talking about last time are on hold. There's been a court stay imposed on those. And so a lot of those details are not right this second applicable. They may be later, but right this minute, they're not. So that may cause some of you to think, sweet, I'll jump off this Zoom and go crack a beer. Don't do that, because a lot of the concepts do still apply, and I'll explain why that is. So just kind of stick with me. This is a little bit complicated, but we'll walk through it. Some of the positives for guides in the EO, and we talked about this last time, for some employees, total compensation could increase, and hourly minimum wage for everyone is going to continue to rise each year, keeping pace with inflation. That was one of the positives of the EO. Potential negatives were, a lot of it really revolves around tips and paperwork. For some tipped guides, because of federal reporting of tips as ordinary income, you could actually make less money if you haven't been reporting tips. I'm not going to assume anyone hasn't. Maybe you all have, but if you haven't been reporting tips, high likelihood that you would have to under these new models. Employers may have needed to cut your work schedule back in order to avoid these hefty overtime pay requirements. And third, a lot of paperwork requirements were, and probably still are, going to come into play here. In order to be compliant with federal law, there's a lot more paperwork that's required around tips, breaks, meal times, meal credits, all sorts of things that we presently, as guides, don't have to deal with. Some of this is still going to be applicable, even though the executive order has been stayed. Let me give you this overview of pay rates, and then Aaron, you can step in wherever you think it's appropriate. The Biden executive order pay rates you see there, the Obama executive order, which would apply to some outfitters who have earlier granted permits, are up there. FLSA is the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's the federal law that's always been in place. Not always, but for the life of most guides, has been in place. You can see that those rates are lower than the executive orders by a significant amount. And then in Idaho, the minimum wage for non-tipped employees matches the federal minimum. And for tipped employees, it's $3.35 an hour, which is higher than the federal minimum. So we put this up there to give you a sense of, depending on how this whole legal quagmire shakes out, this is the base math that you might be looking at in various situations. So here's where we left off. The last Campfire talk, we talked about what was happening, how it would impact you as guides, what the positives were, what the negatives were, and that we would come to you with this next Campfire talk with higher level analysis of how that may apply in your situation. That was on February 7th. Since then, there have been big changes in the courts that have made it so the executive orders are stayed or no longer enforceable. And so while we were, going to be prepared to explain all the details and intricacies of the executive order, that has become, at least for now, a moot point because the federal court has said it's not enforceable. So what we're going to do instead is talk you through, okay, so if that's not happening anymore, what is happening? And go through that in some detail. Many of you might have heard of this lawsuit. We talked about it a little bit in the last Campfire chat. Duke, Bradford, and Colorado River Outfitters Association versus the Department of Labor. That is a lawsuit that IOGA declined to join. And what they requested in that lawsuit was essentially that the Biden EO could not be enforced for outfitters and guides operating on federal lands. They asked the court in Colorado, the federal court in Colorado, to issue an injunction. An injunction means that I would go to the court and say, court, this rule or law should not be enforced because it's illegal and it will impact me in these ways. And therefore you should not enforce it for now while all the legal challenges work their way through the courts. The Colorado district court rejected that request for an injunction and told the plaintiffs, which was the Outfitters Association in Colorado and a specific outfitter, Arkansas Valley Outfitters, I think it was, we disagree with your arguments. We are not issuing an injunction, or Philip Brimmer, the judge, said, I am not issuing an injunction. And it was a pretty, as orders go, kind of brutal to read because it looked like there was no chance of any injunction being issued. I predicted, along with virtually every other lawyer I know, that an appeal of that order was highly unlikely to be successful. This has happened plenty of times in my career, that my assessment was apparently dead wrong because the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals actually did agree with the plaintiffs and issued the injunction. So the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the level of courts right below the Supreme Court, said, we agree with the plaintiffs. The president overreached and didn't have the authority to pass this law, and therefore we're issuing an injunction. So all of the executive order stuff that triggered this whole discussion is now, for the moment, on hold. The 10th Circuit Court said, Department of Labor, you are enjoined from enforcing these rules. All bets are off until this case is litigated. So everything we were talking about is now on hold. This puts us in a place of purgatory. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, why we're in purgatory and what that means to you. First, though, another update. Idaho, the state of Idaho, has filed its own lawsuit against the executive order. IOGA is not part of that lawsuit, but is engaging with the Attorney General's office and others on the lawsuit. But even though that's been filed and it will work its way through the courts, it's not particularly relevant here because the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals has already put a stop to the executive order in its ruling. And so that's going to be in place no matter what happens with this other Idaho lawsuit. Here is the language from the appeals court. The appeals court stated it would enjoin the government from enforcing the minimum wage order. Then a bunch of legalese, which basically I could insert the word outfitters. It will enjoin the government from enforcing the minimum wage order for federal outfitters operating on federal land. So that injunction is in place until further order of this court, meaning the 10th Circuit. Until the 10th Circuit lifts it or the Supreme Court does something about it, that's all on hold. The 10th Circuit could change its mind. There are other legal mechanisms that might impact this, but the upshot is that's on hold. So where does that leave all of us? Where does it leave your employers? Where does it leave you? While I would really love to say that, we dodged a bullet here and don't worry about it, carry on with your lives, this is no big deal. The reality of the situation is this issue is going to be pursued and resolved by the government one way or the other. And what that's likely to look like is that the government will enforce existing federal law in a way that we haven't seen in Idaho or in outfitting and guiding industries. The existing federal law is the Fair Labor Standards Act. And what that requires in a nutshell is payment of minimum wage, time and a half for overtime. It does allow for tip credits in the same way that the executive order did. It does make this concept of when am I sleeping? When am I on break? What does that all look like? That's still relevant under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So while the executive orders are over here now, don't worry about them. It's like a storm that could come back at any time, but it's not what's right in front of us. The Fair Labor Standards Act is in front of us, has always been in place, and is far more likely to have enforcement action from the federal government for outfitters and guides than it has been in the past. So for those reasons, even though this injunction has been issued, I think the landscape for outfitters and guides really has changed, and it's not a genie that's going back in the bottle, is how I would put it. Aaron is going to talk about some of this in a little bit more detail, and Aaron, feel free to jump in on anything that you think I didn't explain well.
I think you nailed it as usual. I'm happy to go back to those. One thing on the charts with the different breakdowns of wages. It's a small thing, but the Trump era executive order wage isn't listed there. And the primary reason for that, I think, is just that the Trump era executive order would have given exemption from the additional requirements imposed by the Obama executive order and returned outfitters basically to FLSA, or folks in our industry to FLSA regulations. So more or less where we stand to be currently. Other than that, pretty comprehensive. So I think where we are
Aaron,
now,
can I just, sorry, just very quickly, since we have this back up, I just took you through the whole legal landscape in about 10 minutes, which is highly complicated. But the reason for putting up this pay rate thing is so right now, what applies to you? It's the FLSA and the Idaho wages, those bottom two. That's what legally applies to you right now. Tip credits are factored in, overtime, other things, but that's the wage. The Biden EO and the Obama EO, the top two, unless a court or the executive branch resurrects the executive order or any of their provisions, those are not presently relevant to your pay analysis. Is that, Stephen, does that make sense to everyone?
Okay. Yeah, I think that hits it pretty well.
Okay. I would say another or, just to add uncertainty, is or when more than if the Department of Labor issues additional guidance from after the ruling, that they could say you all are now subject to the Obama executive order, and either Leah or I could speak maybe later to why we think that is not the case, or won't be the case. But if they said that, then again, as Leah said, it would probably, I imagine, right, Leah, would come down to a legal challenge to make it otherwise. So yeah, odds are FLSA and or same Idaho, but could be Obama depending on the courts if they decided that that's how it, if they decided to interpret it that way. Lots of uncertainty.
Yep, lots of uncertainty. But what we can give you some certainty about is that right now, today, for the immediate future until something changes in the courts or the executive branch, the FLSA and the Idaho rules are what apply in general terms. So I think that's just helpful for you all to have some base numbers to understand, and also to understand all the problems that we identified with the EO. Different order of magnitude with the FLSA, but same concepts. Things are still going to look different. Aaron, I'll jump down to your slides here.
Yeah, and I'll just redouble Leah's segue there, because I've been spending a lot of my time with this stuff, and it does get really confusing. I mean, even when you spend time with it, maybe more so. But I think Leah explains it in a pretty good way, which is when we think of the Biden executive order and sort of the hubbub, there were some additional changes and requirements that brought besides just dollar amounts. But fundamentally, the thing that it changed, there are certain things that it changed, certain variables that it changed in the equation. Think about like middle school algebra. And all we are changing really are those variables when we say the EO is currently at least not in effect. And so I think these slides sort of speak to what the constants in that equation are, and where that leaves us. So the first point here in terms of where we are, where it leaves us, or things to consider is, as outfitters and guides, we were explicitly and very clearly targeted the targets, and that makes it sound bad, but just the most appropriate word, of an executive order. That's pretty significant, just full stop. But in addition to that, in the final rule, which is long, but I've certainly spent some time with, we're also quite obviously a focus of the final rule that the Department of Labor developed to implement, like the regulations basically to implement the executive order. The reason I bring that up and the reason it's relevant is that, as Leah said, I think it does signal the attention that the executive branch is giving to our industry, which is not normal, and frankly doesn't happen too often with any industry. So when policy is established, so when the president says, hey, agency, I want you to look at outfitters and guides, and I want you to make sure that they are in compliance, or bring them into compliance, I think is, or to restore the protections. There's some euphemistic language, but to restore the protections, bring them into compliance. Those policy, especially from executive orders, policy statements aren't like a joint memorial on the state level. They're not toothless. They go along with enforcement, and the Department of Labor has been demonstrating that in funding. So I don't know that if I included the little snippets in this section, but just earlier, actually on February 7th, the Department of Labor had a news release about hiring 100 some odd additional investigators specifically for wage and hour issues. There's just in a different issue with somebody targeted in Idaho last week. So point one, we are certainly under the spotlight that we previously were not under. What that, and this will come back, this will run through, but what that fundamentally means is that compliance or being in compliance is that much more important, not least because the consequences for being out of compliance, in particular for employers, but also for employees, are heightened. The second key consideration, I think, for why we're still talking about this, that's what I'm going through right now, is we do, through the injunction, our industry was exempted from the requirements of the executive order. That said, the injunction could be rescinded or its applicability restricted. So say to just the plaintiffs, just Duke Bradford and the Colorado River Rapids Association, that could be rescinded or coverage restricted at any time. The court, 10th District or Supreme Court, right, Leah, could choose to do that. Additionally, the President Biden could issue another executive order, 15721, whatever number comes next, with the exact same language, change a word, and publish it in the Federal Register tomorrow. The president could also go to the Forest Service. There are authorities in place and just say, you are going to require of your permittees that they pay a minimum of $15 an hour, et cetera. So all of those variables within this equation could be replaced at any given time. And that put outfitters and guides back in a very similar place to what we outlined last time. So all to say, it's not hitting the panic button. It's not be afraid. It's just to say things are changeable, things are uncertain, and at any point we could be back under the EO. Let's see, the next slide just goes back to scrutiny and doubling. That's that's not a 0.3 yet, but this is that little snippet I think. Yep, that little snippet I was referring to. The third area is, I think, what Leah sort of tied up with. So the third reason we're still talking about this is take out, so call X $15 an hour or whatever dollar per hour for a minimum wage for non-tipped. Put in whatever number you want. All of the other requirements that are fundamentally so concerning still remain. So the reason that we started talking more about things like hourly breakouts and hourly reporting, overtime reporting, sleep time and compensable time, tip reporting, things like that, all have to do with the additional scrutiny that came with being named in an executive order. And the fact that I'm not saying we're out of compliance on any of those fronts, but if anybody were, the consequences are also heightened, and that could be devastating both for an employee and for an employer. So just to bring it back, it's not to say be afraid, it's not to say we all need to panic, it's to say the incentive structure for being fully and completely in compliance with the Federal Labor Standards Act and associated taxation laws or tax laws is significantly higher now than it was last season. And we would be very wise as industry professionals to think about what that means for us or what that could mean for us, and to talk with our outfitters about, to make sure that we understand what they're doing, that we have an understanding of what the dynamics are in our own business. I think, I'll pass it over to Leah from there to sort of round that out. But those are the three, that's the summary of the three, when I think about this, the three things in this equation that make this still an equation we have to work on solving or think about. The reason we should still be having this conversation, though some variables have changed. Leah?
Yep. So One thing I just wanted to illustrate, I was talking to my husband about this and some friends that are guides and trying to explain all of this. And one of them said to me, is this really, like, why is this my problem? I mean, really, why do I care? If I'm collecting a paycheck, I'm not the one who has these legal compliance obligations. Not, he wasn't trying to be rude. He was just saying, isn't this the employer's problem? And I'm just coming along for the ride. I just want to make the same money I've always made. And otherwise I don't really care. The fact is, the way this legal landscape has stacked up over the last several years means that if I'm an outfitter, I'm only speaking for myself, hypothetically, if I'm an outfitter, it's just too damn scary to let stuff slide anymore. It's a business ending event. If I get investigated by the labor folks and there's a federal tax people who are looking into auditing taxes and who's reported tips and who hasn't, and all of a sudden it goes from being kind of a theoretical thing, like, Fair Labor Standards Act has been around for a while all across the West in all sorts of industries. It hasn't really been observed because nobody's been enforcing it. It's not just guides, it's and outfitters, it's, farms, ranches, all sorts of folks that have less traditional jobs have been exempt or have thought they were exempt or haven't been paying attention or whatever. That's fundamentally changed. So even if you're outfitter, and I'm not going to identify anyone, but I can tell you that the calls that I've been getting from outfitters is, do I seriously have to establish and force my guides to claim all of their tips? And do I seriously have to have them fill out all of this paperwork? And we have to talk about sleep time and whether you're on a break when you're doing a hike by yourself, or do I really have to cut people's hours to comply with this overtime requirement or pay a lot more money than I'm able to pay? So I say all of that to explain, it kind of sounds like, oh, this is an employer problem. And the fact is, anything that's an employer problem becomes an employee problem, because all of those requirements, pay structures, everything has such a direct impact on you and what you're doing. So IOGA, everyone here on this Zoom call, I think it's important for everyone to understand things are going to change. You need to get a handle on it on both sides. It's not just an outfitter issue. Aaron?
Yeah, sorry, I was still just I was thinking about that. And actually, just as a quick tangent, I was thinking about your statement across the American West in industries like ours, non-traditional industries, while most folks, who knows, I don't know, have been in compliance, are in compliance with the FLSA. It's never been the marker or really the focus of our types of industries. I think it's also telling that in Idaho, in our industry, that I know of, in however long the FLSA and our industry in Idaho has been around, both of which is a long time, I don't know of complaints. Sure, they've happened, sure they've been there, but for the most part, I think that's pretty telling of what's worked in the industry for Idaho. Anyway, that's a side note. How can guides help IOGA and themselves regarding the EO, wage and hour, overtime issues? Let's see. If you go to the next slide down there, Leah. I think the main thing, as I alluded to, it comes across as trite, but honestly, just talking to your outfitters and other employees is probably the single most important thing you can do. Most issues on the river otherwise, or in the mountains, in our industry, arise out of misunderstanding and not understanding what your outfitter's doing, what they aren't doing, what's expected of you. That's a sure way to get into a tough situation, especially when, as Leah mentioned, outfitters are asking themselves these questions, and usually in a frustrated way, like, do I really have to require my guys to keep a daily or trip, like a daily tip report, which is technically something you're supposed to do with the FLSA every single day, which on a multi-day trip, it's another example of how does that even make sense for me. Do I really have to sign off on getting 8 hours of sleep? Like, what if I don't want to sleep 8 hours? Like there are certain things in there that just don't make sense, but understanding what your outfitter, what level of comfort they have with those different rules and what they expect of you is pretty key. Hopefully they'll talk to you about it, but if they haven't, or if they don't, you know, as the season's coming up, I'd encourage you to start an informal conversation with them. They're under a lot of pressure and they're trying to figure it out. So be patient. I've talked to probably most of them and I can tell you they are genuinely trying to figure it out, and they're trying to figure out what works for their employees. It's the first question they ask, besides, am I going to make it? The thing, and I'm not really going to go into these, the listed down after think, because I think those are some of these things Stephen and Michael sent over, things they've been talking about, and they may speak to some of these, but just a quick listing of some of the other things that aren't necessarily strictly pay related that will, let alone could accompany compliance with Fair Labor Standards Act, not least with any executive order. Again, the executive order is just the variable where it changes amounts and some fringe issues. So the second thing there, first thing is communication with other folks, employers, other people in the industry. Second thing is just think for yourself about the different ways this could impact you to inform those conversations, so you can figure it out for yourself. And the third thing is just to stay engaged. We try to get, if IOG doesn't have your email, if you don't get newsletters from me, you would know, I promise. But if you don't get newsletters, if you want them, go to the website and sign up. We try to keep everyone up to date on what's happening. Oftentimes there are calls to action, which if you agree with that call to action, such as contacting our congressional, has something related to this, the guide voice is, especially in employment relations issues, is really, really strong in DC. But you have an outsized voice on this issue relative to the size of the industry. And the final reason is just obvious, right? Because Idaho is one of the few places in the country where we do have professional guides, where there are lifers, there are many of them, they're year round. This is a profession, should take it seriously. IOGA takes it seriously. And final thing there, which again sounds schmaltzy, but it's the Outfitters and Guides Association, not the Outfitters Association. So that's another reason to stay engaged.
Hey, Aaron, just to jump in briefly in case folks don't totally know what we are talking about with lobbying efforts. So if you analyze this and come to these campfire talks, or, I mean, there's plenty of explanations of how this would work on Google. I mean, the information's out there. If you read that, you become informed and you decide, I don't like this overtime structure. I think that that's not a good fit for how I want to function in my profession as a guide. I don't want to clock in and out. I'm comfortable with a day rate as long as I feel that it's fair and equitable pay for the job that I do. You know, I don't want to have to keep detailed, delicate records of my tips. I don't want a bunch of additional paperwork. I'm happy with the way things are, and that whatever the pay structure is what the market will bear. If any of those things are true and you feel that way, and I think that's a totally individual choice, Aaron's point is, if you write your congressman and say, you know, I think that there should be an exemption from these FLSA or overtime requirements for guides, that means a lot more than your outfitter calling, because I think that Biden and Obama and a lot of other well-meaning people who are trying to bring wages up in this country don't understand that the way that's structured in our industry may actually be unwelcome and do more harm than good to you, your life, your bottom line. I think that's an individual choice, but if you felt that way, you do have an outsized voice in lobbying.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that home, because it is. I mean, it's like, hey, representative, please stop helping me. I'm fine. And, it's really interesting looking at the groups that are the professions that do have exemptions already from overtime reporting requirements and things like that. So wreath makers, if you work from home making wreaths, that's real. That's a real thing. So there are, seamen, there's any number of industries that are either absurd or kind of like ours, where it's unreasonable to switch out groups from the middle of the wilderness or the middle of the sea, or where it's seasonal and different that way, where this just doesn't apply. So yeah, to Leah's point, I appreciate you bringing it back up, but guides really do, especially on an issue like this, have a very outsized voice. So if it is something that if you don't think that this model is necessarily compatible, let me know, and I can give you direction on who to get in touch with and how to do it.
All right, I'm going to jump back in here. We are not going to go to questions and answers just yet. I think we're going to have Michael come on and
we are. Sorry, that slide was misleading. My bad, Stephen.
No, you're good. I'm gonna take over on that part. But if you do have questions, I said it before, but I'll say it again. There's Jess Zettel is the co-host in here, so just send your questions to her, and she'll relay them back to me. So after Michael, he's gonna give his perspective. He's a guide in the industry. He's not part of the board of directors for IOJ or anything. He's just a guide that heard our last campfire and wanted to get involved and help. So we figured he would be a great voice to lend in on these topics for you guys to hear from. So yeah, I see Jess just popped up in there. So send your questions to her, and then we will get to those after Michael goes through his thing, if Michael is ready.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. I've sat in on a lot of talks on this topic, and I always learn something and come away with something. And I think what I heard this time was Leah said this has become an employee issue, and that's really true, because I think what maybe some guides aren't seeing is the outfitter is now having to shift how they kind of have payroll set up, how they have the pay scale set up, where money is going to gear and all sorts of things. And it really comes down to like kind of what they're going to pay or what your rate of pay is. And they're really thinking about that. And some of the things that you may see change here, and these are conversations and some things that I've had with some guides out there. You're going to lose you may lose some of these awesome benefits of, free or cheap rent at a guide house in the summer. The tipping thing is, going to be different. I'm not going to dive into that because I'm not a lawyer or anything, but like, that's going to be a big piece. And some other things you may see is like, you may lose like travel or train reimbursement, because again, your outfitter has to cover some costs or shift some things around some way. And a couple of the other things that we've been talking about, or that people have brought up, are some companies have some kind of end of season bonus, or, hey, you've been here for X number of years or time, you get paid this rate, where new guides maybe get paid a less rate or whatever. And I think that this could really collapse that pay scale. A new guide is likely going to make, or could make, something similar to a guide that does this as a profession and is here all the time and works year round and is guiding. That may not seem like a big thing, but if you've been a guide for a long time, you might be like, this person that can hardly get a boat down the river gets paid the same as me. That can be they can be tough to swallow, or just a little bit odd. And not to, I'll keep things short, but kind of repeat like why we're still having this conversation. And it kind of goes back to what Aaron said, like this temporary hold could go away at any point. It could go away tomorrow. They could be talking about it right now. And I was on a meeting talking about this a couple weeks ago, and in the chat, oh, hey, this changed. There's a hold on it. And I was like, oh, so what happens now? And like Aaron said, it could happen in a number of ways. And so I think those pieces are really what kind of drew me to be like, hey, how can I help you guys? Because I want to see like guides getting involved and learning about it, and having a voice, kind of like Aaron said, because it is your livelihood, and in some more than others and whatnot. But kind of another thought that I've had is, this could, I kind of go back to some training reimbursements. Like this could change the industry as a whole, like really big, and it's going to. But some outfitters are maybe going to end some training bonuses or training spending and require some higher training, which I think is a good thing. But this could move into making this a little bit more of a career option for people. And I think that's just something, we can kind of think about, and how we can change this kind of executive order and make this something that fits guiding a whole lot better, and something kind of for a compromise, or, and so I'm just excited to see all these people here that are ready to learn and figure this out and can be a part of it. So I think that's all I have. Some thoughts from kind of a guide manager perspective for you guys. Back to you,
really well
Steve.
said.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. That was great. I think that was well said and well put. Thank you. We really appreciate that. I'm not seeing any questions as of yet.
I mean, if we can, Stephen, I just something Michael brought up there. So, like, I'm a guide, right? But I spend a lot of most of my time, if I'm not talking to somebody who's elected, I'm probably talking to an outfitter or doing something adjacent to that. And like I said, it's true. I mean, I know how it sounds, but it's true that outfitters overwhelmingly, the basis of their concerns, sure, it comes back to whether or not they can have a business, but it also comes back to their guides, if it'll be good, if it'll work for them. Like, so one question that you made me think of, Michael, is like a number of outfitters who have had the question of like, how am I supposed to get young people involved in this if I can't afford to pay them? So if I can't afford to pay them, like I pay my senior staff, right? And that was in particular under the Biden EO, but they're saying like there's a 17-year-old who is going to ride on a sweet boat maybe for a trip if they like it and decide whether or not they want to work. But in theory, I have to pay that person for a full guide's wage, and I can't do that, let alone train them into it, right? So I don't know. It's I guess where I was going with that is there are a lot of questions that I think guides are uniquely probably positioned to help outfitters figure out, or if nothing else, just to like talk through. Like, and I think outfitters would be, I can't speak for them, but I think they'd be open to it. I think they'd welcome it as long as it was actually constructive and not just do better, I think they'd appreciate it. I don't know. I think there's it's big thoughts, but I'd be pretty excited if guides started a more robust conversation among themselves and then took it to outfitters and became part of a solution, like informing lobbying, say at the congressional level. You brought up compromises. Like, what would it look like if guides lobbied independently, even maybe of outfitter associations or through the outfitter associations, for the amendments that they wanted as workers to the Fair Labor Standards Act or other things that were more compatible with the profession that they chose? I think it'd probably look a hell of a lot better than it would look if anybody else tried to figure it out for them. So I guess I'll leave it there, but that one in particular struck me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so not very many questions coming through in the chat, so please feed them our way. Everybody, if you have questions, send them our way. I think you might have just hit on this a little bit, but one of them being, how will this affect outfitters' decisions to bring on trainees on river trips or in a hunting situation, or land-based of some kind? I think we can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, if we have hunt guides, I'm not a hunt guide myself, but I have some perspective on it. But actually, Steven, you're a hunt guide and river guide. But so I guess you could speak to it, or somebody else. I can't see the participants list, but somebody else who is. I think it's going to be tough. So there are. It would be tough, especially under something like the Biden EO, because the pay rates would be high enough that it'd just be really, really tough to justify paying basically the equivalent of what you'd pay a seasoned full-time multi-day guide in Idaho for somebody who may or may not be there next week, and has zero skills, or at least zero. That's zero to begin with, right? So there are some exemptions. One is if you're younger than 20, then there's like every time I try to remember the name, that just make it sound weird, but it's like the minor employment something. There's an exemption to the FLSA, but it's like 90 days from the day that you were technically hired. That's the total amount of time you were allowed to work for those wage rates. There's also some particular ones for internships or apprenticeships, but the requirements for demonstrating that is actually pretty onerous. So there'd have to be some pretty particular circumstances, I think, for that to make sense, either for the trainee or for the outfitter. And I think it's in particular, and Steve, maybe you could jump in and interrupt me if I'm just pulling this out of nowhere. But so for hunt outfitters, I know in OGL in Idaho rules, for hunt guides, I mean, in OGLB rules, there's like apprentice guide, right? So if you're going to a new operating area, or just generally if you're starting out, there's a designated, like a state designated role and position as an apprentice guide, until you apprentice up into it. That is not actually compatible, it doesn't look like, with the definition of apprenticeship under federal FLSA law. So there are instances like that where I wonder so if you hire somebody on as an apprentice, which is, if not required, then the standard process on the state level, but the same exact designation does not align on the federal level, then are you taking a legal risk as an outfitter or as a guide, but mostly probably as an outfitter, and even hiring that person on? I guess I rambled there for a bit, but I think it does. I think one of the things that in particular, again, the Biden EO, which is stayed right now, but in particular with the Biden EO, some of the things that it would do, I think, would be to limit the opportunity for new folks to break into the industry, and also definitely limit the opportunity for a broader spectrum of people to get into these places and have those experiences. I think without the Biden EO and the increased costs, it comes back more to compliance, but there are still some of the issues around new people breaking into the industry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you hit that pretty well. There's lots of layers to it. I think that the pay scale thing is something kind of foreign, but will rear its ugly head immediately if those things come together. Like, I think senior guides might brush that off now, but if all of a sudden, you've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden the rookie who doesn't know how to row a boat, can't get down the river, as Michael said, is getting paid the same amount of money as you, you're going to go, okay, this isn't right.
That feels pretty cool.
Yeah. And, it's just, it's that ceiling of pay that we've all been accustomed to, so it's kind of a bummer. It's something that obviously this doesn't fit our industry, which is, I feel like, one of the key components of all of this that keeps running through my head is.
Well, so Steve, yeah. I guess I got a question for you and Michael. Like, what is your sense of, and maybe for you too, Leah, but what is your sense of how much of a pain in the butt do you think most guys actually consider it when they think about it, to do the type of reporting that they would be required to do to be in full compliance with the FLSA and potentially EO. So like basically clocking in, clocking out, having some sort of set agreements about off time at beaches where you're like literally not allowed to work. And if you do, you have to, write some sort of statement, noting down sleep time, recording all tips on a daily basis and reporting 100% of them, all of those things. Like, do you guys have have you done like your informal surveys talking with the folks?
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to a bunch of my buddies that I work with in Alaska, and it's going to be a unique situation there. It's obviously a different state than Idaho, but I think it falls all underneath the same deal. But, when we're up there in the springtime, the 1st of June, it's 24 hours of daylight all the time. So I just like sit there and scratch my head. Like, so if we're out on a trip, we're going after something, do we just have to stop at 3 a.m. because that's when we clock out? Like, no, sorry, we're going back to camp. We're done for like, those are things that I don't think a lot of people are aware of in our industry that are, writing rules about it. And it's like, that just doesn't make any sense. It's like sometimes things go past your 8 hours of sleep requirement and it's just not going to fit. So that's kind of a little off on a tangent, but like, that is exactly one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, it's a really good example. I actually hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. So, like there's oftentimes, we go after something and you're out for 24 hours. And it's like, that's just kind of the way the industry is. And I'm more than happy to do that. But under these new rules, am I going to be allowed to, am I going to fall out of compliance because I wasn't able to do that? And just trying to keep track of all that seems impossible, but that's my take on it. There's my example of where I just don't understand how that's possible, but yeah.
Leah and Michael, you're both guides. Any particular ones on your end?
Yeah, it sounds crazy to have to, kind of keep your logbook as you're on the river. And there's just so much gray area, like you get to camp and you're just going to sit on your boat for a little bit and hang out. Like, oh, well, let's say, let me quick write this down. It just seems like a huge pain in the butt. I have a hard enough time getting like trip paperwork from some guides, or like, getting people to post some photos on the internet so the guests can have them, like it's like kind of another hurdle that a lot of guys, a lot of guys maybe don't want to have to jump over. Like the extra paperwork, maybe that's part of why they have stuck with guiding or are really drawn to guiding, because they're like, oh, I don't have to, sit in front of a computer. I don't have to, fill out all this paperwork or something. Kind of one of those unspoken maybe benefits of working in the guide world is you kind of maybe don't follow the clock all the time. And, some days you may work 12 hours. The next day you had a really easy day and it was 4. But then the next day it was 16 hours. I think it's kind of, one of those kind of unspoken benefits, maybe some people might want to look at it, or something that drew people into it. Leah, do you have any thoughts?
A couple thoughts. I mean, what you were saying, Michael, does strike me that I think a lot of what I valued in guide world is just the freedom and the responsibility that is part of that job. Like, you have this big crazy windstorm and everything's blown in the river, and then you have to get downstream and you're super late to camp, and you're sitting on the boat with your buddies after that has finally settled down and you've been awake and you're exhausted. And those are a lot of those memories are that's a lot of the joy in reality. Like the hard parts are part of the fun. And if I had to log that, or if like someone was dealing with, a client tipped the groover over and my buddy's over there trying to clean it up, and I'm like, sorry, bro, I'm on break, like, right. Like the whole concept of like keeping a logbook and my ammo can, like that just sounds like a huge bummer. The other thing from the employer perspective that I wanted to just talk about a little bit is, some of the conversations I've had with guides are, they're making plenty of money outfitters can make up this difference. They just take it from their pocket and they make up the difference. It's not that big of a deal. Everybody's just being greedy. And I mean, maybe that's true in some cases, but I think one way to look at it is like this. You know, you have your budget for your life. You have rent, food, car, student loan payments, whatever else. If somebody tells you your rent is tripling, or doubling, or whatever the case may be, one of your major budget items has massively changed. You can't just say to yourself, well, now I just need less. Like, I didn't need to make the money I was making. I can just scrape off the top. Like, that's just not reality for anybody, business owners, guides, people who sell chocolate. I mean, whatever the case is, we all have our needs. We have a budget based on those needs. And if somebody tells you that whole landscape has changed, it's just not that simple. And I just feel compelled to, you know, kind of stick up for the outfitters that might be feeling some heat from employees. Like, they just need to suck it up. It's not that easy, and it wouldn't be for you either. So I just think that's a good thing to keep in mind. So
there's a question in the chat that kind of segues off of a little bit of what we were just talking about. And this is, I can confirm with this, it's kind of sometimes a norm in the hunting industry is, you know, let's say you're successful on day 2 of your hunt. And for a lot of outfitters, they will pay a guide through the rest of the week just because it's a daily rate. And, you know, maybe you do some different chores or something, but you're working that way. You know, he asked, like, how's that going to work out with this new hourly rate? Like, how, you know, do I not get paid for that now because I don't work the hours, or do you know, I kind of butchered that question, but that's kind of where he's getting at. I don't know if you guys have any opinion on it.
I mean, sounds like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it would depend on the outfitter. They could choose to continue to pay somebody to not work, but I mean, I think there are situations where, like, say we're still under say the EO is not back in place and there's nothing similar to it that has come in. So we're just subject to standard minimums and whatever really the outfitter pays, but to the standard FLSA requirements. At that point, it's really just a matter of, well, I'm going to pay you to not work on purpose, though, for, you know, 8 hours of the next 3 days. And congrats on, you know, getting your client that buck or whatever it is. But I'm going to need you to make sure that you let me know that you slept 8 hours and off time that you took. And I don't know. It is a good example. I mean, I imagine it's going to depend on pay and what they can afford. Like, I imagine that they'd be able to pay him the rest of the time if they had him out there on a hunt of a certain length. But if I were an outfitter, if I were a business owner, period, it'd be pretty hard for me to justify, like, especially if I was on an hourly approach, like, yeah, I'm going to keep my employee hanging out, being rad, having fun for the next 4 days, just cause, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think there's any rules though that come to bear there that I know of, unless I'm missing some, Leah. Yeah. I don't think you can't not pay somebody to not work. Wait, I don't think there's any prohibition to paying somebody for not working.
That was
this is America after all.
That was a badly butchered ending to your answer. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. So, you know, if the question is, yeah, the outfitter could continue to pay you, but likely what will be happening with the outfitter is it comes back to that budget thing. They're going to budget what's payroll. How does that take away from other budget items? Can I still justify doing things the way I've always done them under this new pay structure with these new requirements? Another thing that's potentially happening for outfitters is there are a lot of folks that are considering hiring an entirely new full-time HR position to deal with the paperwork. And that's a budget item that was not in anyone's budget last season. So, you know, I think thinking of it like your own budget is the best way to think of it. Trade-offs will have to be made. And that, depending on the outfitter and what their situations are, the trade-offs might be something that are a real bummer for guides. That's the point of having some of these conversations too. Lines of communication open with everybody, I think will be helpful.
Yep. And I think for one day and shorter length trips for guides that do those types of trips, those outfitters are very likely either going to have to or going to try to just to be able to swing it higher much more heavily than they have in the past. Just because, I mean, maybe on one day is more than anything. You're like, the idea is you have a working season and you want to work every single day of that working season to make as much money as you can and go do, you know, if it's different seasons or school or whatever it is. But when your outfitter runs into overtime and they're looking at one-day trips and their payroll just boomed, it's a heck of a lot easier for them, and they're business people, but it's a heck of a lot easier for them and maybe necessary in a lot of cases to go out and just hire additional people and work everybody less. There are very real trade-offs. And I know it's getting a little bit off where you're going, Stephen. I apologize. I'll shut up in a second. But I just did want to say I've talked to a number of outfitters, this is true, who have shared just on a personal level, so I'm not going to say names or anything, about like going from being guides to being outfitters and losing money straight for 15 years, not making as much as they made guiding. And then finally, somewhat recently, in a couple of cases, getting to a place where they were finally making more than they made guiding just to get hit with this. The notion, it's not that some outfitters don't make good money. It's also not that we should ever punish them or incriminate them or say that or hold that against them. Congratulations. It's really hard to do in this industry. So if you did, you're basically a unicorn. But for the most part, they don't. Anyway, it's hard for all of us. I think it underscores I'm tired, I'm true of heart. You're tired, you're true of heart. Like, I think we should say that to each other as outfitters and guides, because I think it's true in both cases. This issue just brings it to the fore.
There was another question. Is there a place where guides can get contact info or find the proper representatives to contact to voice our opinion about this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So the IGA, and I'll get this updated, the IGA site, which everyone who has ever been there will be happy to know is in the process of being rebuilt and should be completely new site here very soon. But we have some call to action forms on there that go directly to the forms that at least House members use now. Most reps and senators do. So we can get the contact information. You can contact them directly through the site. Otherwise, you can call us, and I can, on a personal level, give you some information for staffers. That's usually a more direct way to get in touch with somebody. And write a personal letter or a personal phone call. And the final one is just Googling who's my congressman. And it'll get you directly. Unfortunately, for the most part, they all have forms now. So you can't really ever get to them directly. The closest you can get to is a staffer from the outside, but absolutely. So I think my email is aaron@ioga.org, but I think everybody knows how to get in touch with me. So whoever that question came from, there's stuff on the site, there's stuff on the Google, and you can otherwise call me.
Awesome. All right, everybody. I'm not seeing any more questions, so we'll give that a minute, see if any more pop up. Please send in more. We're happy to answer those. From you three, any more comments before I kind of head on to the next aspect? I know we've just been talking a bunch right now, but Leah, Michael, Aaron.
No, I mean, there's questions for days, but run a show to you.
Yeah.
Anything, Michael?
Just like one quick thing, kind of back to one of Aaron's questions about maybe like how this is, or about if guides are going to want to do this or how they feel. Like, I think a big thing to think about is could potentially change how trips work and kind of the communal aspect of guiding. And kind of Leah pointed it out about, oh, the groover fell over and somebody's over there cleaning it up, but I'm on my break. I'm not going to help. Like, that's not typically, kind of how the guide crew works. It can, really create kind of a strange community of coworkers. And then it gets hard where you're like, oh, I wouldn't help. It's like, oh, you're at 5 minutes for, cleaning. It just sounds tough. So that was my last thought about your guide community and your coworkers.
This isn't an inspirational last thought. Maybe it won't be the last thing I say, but I would, like, when I hear that, one of the things that the devil's advocate in my brain I hear saying is like, well, yeah, Michael, but who's actually going to be enforcing that? Like, nobody's going to double check if I help them clean the groover. But thing is, if somebody gets investigated, you actually do get personally interviewed in a pretty rigorous way by a Department of Labor investigator, and you're under oath, and it's scary. Like, I don't know. It's easy to poo-poo, but well, so to speak. but I think it's easy to poo-poo, but it's a real consideration, certainly for the employer and for the employee once you're in that situation being questioned.
Yeah, any final things before I go on to the next?
Nope, nothing for me.
Awesome. All righty. Well, folks, I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a closing statement here. I already kind of mentioned, as I talked about my guiding in Alaska, I was going to use that as a primary example of how all this stuff just really doesn't seem to fit our industry. And that's why we keep talking about it, is we really need to find a way to address what fits our industry and describes how, we all work. Because there's always going to be late nights and early mornings that just don't fit into a standard work week. And that's, I think, probably the beauty of the industry, in my opinion. It's why I keep coming back. You're able to work for 6 or 7 months and really pack it in and do some amazing things, and then go be a ski bum in the winter and move around and do some. And that's what I look at is, the freedom of the industry is what's so special to me. And unfortunately, the days of the Department of Labor not breathing down our necks about all this, I think are over. But that doesn't mean we can't still have a say in the fight, and how we handle this as an industry going forward. So, we kind of need to adjust and keep having these conversations and not be caught in the dark. Like, I think a lot of guides may be in that way right now. They don't realize that, they just see, hey, we're going to get paid more. Well, that's even kind of falling apart too with this happening. But the eye of the Department of Labor, being honest, will change things fundamentally. And I don't think a lot of guides realize that it hasn't been on them forever. So that's something that I'm, my eyes are open to. And as the guide rep, I hope to continue to spread that information to everybody. Thanks to everybody who joined. We're going to have the same recording kind of set up. There'll be, this got recorded. We'll have a link for anybody who wants to share this to someone who might want to watch it. The overtime committee is still dynamic in who's helping us at times, when we need more help and all those things. So if you feel that, just like Michael, he's been a great addition and we really appreciate him. Watch this, reach out to, it's overtime@ioga.org. And, if you have something you'd like to say, you need to find the link. If that's a struggle or something, reach out to that email, reach out to any of us, who can help you out. And then, last time we had a campfire, we thought we had the future planned with this executive order, and that's all gone to hell. So another event is probably going to happen, and we'll be able to discuss, the new changes that happen. Not sure on a date on that quite yet, but we'll be looking forward to that out in the future. But I think think that was pretty much all we had for everybody. We really appreciate you joining, and yeah, reach out if you have questions or want to help in all those ways. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, Leah.
Stephen.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron and Leah.
Thanks, everyone. Just one final thought. I was sitting here reflecting and thinking, you know, I deal with lawyers and judges all day, every day that think they're the smartest people in the world. And I'm always struck when I talk with my clients or with guides, how just intelligent and grounded this whole community is. So spread the word to people that are not checked in on this. Help your buddies get checked in. Really does matter. And use those big brains of yours to try to use this as an inflection point, an opportunity to make things better. So guiding becomes more of a profession and not relegated to, you look like every other person that has a clock in, clock out factory job. Everyone is too good to let that happen to the industry. So use this as an opportunity. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. All right. I think we're good.
Great.
Thanks, Aaron.
Good night.
See you guys.
Thanks.